Okay, welcome everyone. I can see that you're all joining in and you're writing in the chat. If you haven't already, please take a few minutes to write where you're from and what levels you serve so we can get an idea of which schools are joining us today. My name is Amelia Pfeiffer and I am the Executive Director of PSTA. I want to welcome you to the 5th in our webinar series of school entry webinars. Today, our focus is going to be on the unique challenges that are being faced by rural schools as we re-enter into school. Today, our featured guest will be Allie Mullins from Remake Learning. But before I introduce our guests, I would just like to let you know about our next and final webinar in our series. If I could show the next slide here. It is going to be in 2 weeks on October 28th. It is Reentry through an urban lens. So today we're focusing on the rural school districts, and in 2 weeks we will focus on the urban school districts. All of the webinars run from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, just like today's. And if you would like to register, or if you know of a colleague who works in an urban school district and you want to encourage them to register, tell them just go to our website. It is paschoolcounselor.org/reentry. These webinars are open to anyone, whether you are a member of PSTA or not, but certainly we do encourage you to join PSTA if you are not a member, and they are completely free. And after this webinar today, after the recording, we will have it posted on our website at that same place, paschoolcounselor.org/reentry. The next slide is going to show you what all of our reentry webinars are based on. Our president, Steve Sharp, he took the lead on this and he worked with the school psychologists of Pennsylvania to put together a guide which has a bunch of resources in it to assist school counselors with re-entering back into school. So again, if you want to check this out, this is also available, same place on our website, paschoolcounselor.org/reentry. So now I would like to introduce our guest, Allie Mullins. She is with Remake Learning. She is the Rural Outreach Coordinator as well as the Special Events Coordinator. Remake Learning is based in the Pittsburgh region. And in her rural outreach, Allie seeks to connect rural leaders across southwestern PA and northern West Virginia in order to partner, share opportunities, and discuss best practices. Allie's passionate about working with the nonprofit sector, the arts, and within education. With these in mind, she strives for increased creativity, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So Allie, we are so excited to have you join us today. We also are going to have 2 school counselors who work in rural settings as well joining us. First, we have Erica Germani, she is in the Western Wayne School District and works in the Robert D. Wilson Elementary School. Erica is the 2019 Pennsylvania School Counselor of the Year. She's also a RAMP recipient, so we are very happy to have her join us. And then we also have Lee Aaron, who is with St. Mary's Area High School. Lee is a past president of PSTA. She's past president. Her year was 2013 and 2014. So we are also very happy she could join us today. And then, of course, our session today will be moderated by our president, Steve Sharp, and we are happy to have all of you with us today. Well, so take it away, Steve.
Yeah,
so good to see you today.
Yeah, I'm so excited for everyone to join us. Really, when it comes down to it, if everyone else wants to come on screen, When we start talking about the needs that we're seeing emerge across the state, it became really clear that there was a great disparity in really two areas that we know that there's always need, and those were going to be both our urban and our rural populations. As I reached out to PDE and I asked who's the expert when it comes to helping students in rural populations, I didn't finish the sentence before they recommended Allie Mullins to me. And so I really appreciated that. And I didn't realize that through the National Center for Women in Information Technology that Allie and I had collaborated back in May, apparently, from a distance. Separate to that, absolutely, I can say like Erica and Lee are models when it comes to school counseling in the profession. And I very value their insight in their work with students. So they were short order as far as who we could have to connect. So if everyone wants to join us right now, why don't we start the conversation? So to kick off right now, I just really, why don't we set the tone and really talk about it? We understand like our rural schools are really defined by their distance when it comes from urban centers. And with that, we have a wealth of resources and other needs that emerge. Erica, can you talk a little bit as far as just like what your experience has been for the past few months?
Sure. So obviously in March, when everything closed down, we were stuck with what the heck do we do, kind of like every other school and school counselor across the state. I work in a district that has 2,000 students. We have 4 schools, so I'm at one of our 2 elementary schools. And I have to say the biggest challenge during that time was actually trying to support parents and getting the parents what they need, because they didn't have the technology, they didn't have the knowledge of using the technology, nor did a lot of the students. And so that being that the only way they could access their education, again, just like I'm sure every other school across the state struggled with giving them that access. That being said, there were also families that had all of those things in place that we never saw them during the whole, online learning period. So that was challenging in of itself. So over the summer, admin worked really hard to form our reopening plan, which we are one of the only schools I know of that are in full reopen. So I have 300 students or so in my school, and although we offer a virtual option, we have probably 85% of our students back in class. So I teach classes that have 22 kids in them, so in a lot of ways, it doesn't even feel like, there's a huge difference. And in some ways that's a blessing, and in some ways it's not. So our challenge now is not so much the technology and the access. Now our biggest concern is health and safety, because we have so many people in the building every day. And to remedy the situation we were perplexed with in the spring, we have got every student an electronic device, and they use them in school so we can train them in person in class, and they use them at home for homework, again, in anticipation that we're going to be remote at some point this year.
Lee, can you talk a little bit from your lens, just some things that you're seeing?
Thanks, Steve. I'm in a high school setting.
Happy PSAT Day. I'm glad you could make it with us today.
Oh, yeah, any high school person just finished up the PSATs today. Oh, it was my first time, so that was interesting.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. I'm in a high school. It's my 3rd year at the high school, and similar experiences of what Erica talked about. When we shut down in March, we also had there's parts in our region, in our area, that do not have internet. So we were trying to figure out what to do for those folks, and some options were thought of and put into place. And also, like Erica, we are back 100. We are fully open 5 days a week since the very beginning of school. So today was day 32. We do have far less students than we originally thought taking advantage of our virtual academy. So students in our district had 3 options when we were looking at reopening. First of all, we had obviously full 5-day in school full time. Our second option was called a virtual academy, and those are folks that are taught by our teachers. We have a couple handfuls of teachers that are specifically teaching our virtual academy students. So they're teachers that we had in-house here that are now teaching them. Then our third option is our complete virtual students, and they, we call them like in a box, because they get all of their materials like sent to them, their books, their equipment, whatever they need. And yes, in a box. And people outside of the district are the teachers and responsible for their work. So, but we were surprised at how many students actually came back. We thought we might have more in our virtual academy than we actually started off with. And we are coming up at the end of our marking period, which is the end of the month, where students will be able to decide if they want to come back in brick and mortar, or some of our brick and mortar kids might decide to go to virtual. So we have that opportunity for some of those kids to switch or to stay with whatever method of learning that they currently have.
So it seems like there's still a range of experiences for two pretty similar learning models.
Mm-hmm.
Allie, can you talk a little bit as far as your role with Remake Learning and the services and support that you provide, and some of the themes and trends that you've been seeing across the state?
Yeah, so across specifically my region in Southwestern PA and in Northern West Virginia, there's been a theme with folks that I've talked with, and that includes educators and out of school time folks and organization leads, that there's a lot of pivoting going on, right? So we're pivoting from in-person, hybrid, and online learning. So some schools and districts here in Southwestern PA specifically are fully in person. Some are doing a hybrid method where some days of the week they're in person, other days of the week they're online. So there's been this kind of general, we're gonna go each step of the way, each week how we can, because of course in a pandemic, you can't tell what's going to happen. But it's been a lot of innovating on the rural communities over here's part. I can't speak for the rest of the state, but I imagine that in terms of trying to do hybrid models and get materials to folks that maybe don't have a lot of access to the internet or stable internet has been a challenge. And it's been a continuous learning process for the folks in my region.
So I hear a lot of things as far as just the spirit of innovation that's been happening, either for the region that you support or in your buildings. What kind of innovation has been happening to support students or help the families when it comes to access or understanding the technology or their students' needs?
Yeah, so with educators and folks that I've spoken with in the region, there has been, a lot of utilization of the USPS in sending materials or sending USB drives to folks that have access to a computer in their homes. There's also been a lot of really interesting partnerships and great partnerships where teachers and administration in different districts are partnering with different companies to provide hotspots for their students. Now that's really exciting for me to know. And companies like T-Mobile and Comcast, I know Comcast has been putting it out there for a while since the beginning of the pandemic that they were going to provide hotspots for folks. So they've been doing a lot of organizing and just connecting and utilizing what's out there in order to get more connectivity and accessibility to their students or the kids that they work with.
How about on the more local level in your buildings? Erica, Lee, what are some things that you've been noticing?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I already kind of brushed upon is that although we are full in person, we are still using virtual learning. So for example, if I'm teaching a guidance lesson, the students are bringing their laptops to my room. And if I created, some kind of document, they're actually doing it on Google Classroom. So that way, like I said, it's streamlined when and if they ever have to go back. In addition, one of our virtual options is for students to actually live stream into all of their classes throughout the school day. And so, you're toggling between teaching live I also have Google Classroom students streaming with me, right? And so that's helping them learn. It's helping me learn as an instructor and as a counselor how to do that. So I think just kind of like meshing those two together is really helpful, but has also been a challenge, right? For all of our teachers, they are now they feel as if they're kind of teaching two classrooms, it's almost double the work. And so what I've been trying to do is really supporting our teachers as much as I possibly can, because our students, at least at the elementary level, like they're resilient. They like jumped right into it. Like they've adapted. Of course, they love electronics. They understand them better than we do. But it's supporting the staff that are kind of like burdened with learning these new things and doing extra work every single day is you know, depleting morale, so to speak.
Yeah, Lee.
Yeah, for we don't have some of the issues that you were talking about, Eric. It was kind of interesting. We because we have a different set of teachers that are teaching our virtual academy students, they're not live streaming in. So I can see how that would be difficult for those teachers to manage that. Yeah, that's a lot. Although it'd be a neat experience. We do have some, for the classes that we couldn't do a virtual model for, those students have the option to come in and sit in that actual class and take those classes here in the brick and mortar building, but do the majority of their work on the academy. So that's the only difference that we're doing that from what Erica was talking about. But I think finding ways to support the staff are very important because we've been in school 32 days now, and it's and knowing that we had to cut out so much of the fun stuff. I can't imagine how much fun stuff at the elementary level, because I worked elementary for 18 years. That's kind of hard. You know,
Lee did start in education when she was 10 years old. Please continue.
So there definitely are some challenges because you don't get to do all the fun stuff that you would want to do with kids. It just seems like it's hard to keep morale up at times because of all the restrictions that are in place and whatnot. So
I think that's an excellent question. With the disruption in the rituals, the routines, the ways that we support students, with the strain that we understand the past 6 months have taken on our communities, how are you supporting your students right now? What are some ways that either you or you've heard of innovative ways to support students or staff members when it comes to their social emotional wellness and their mental health through the pandemic? What strategies do we have?
So I'm really fortunate to work in a district that values mental health. And so we are fortunate to have low counselor to student ratios. And my administrator also, like I said, values social emotional health. So she actually blocked off in every teacher's schedule the first 30 minutes of the day is devoted to social emotional learning. So whether the teacher decides to play video or have an open class discussion or, you know, support them in some other way, we have that time blocked off that we can, you know, discuss those important things. But like I said, I have to be surprised at how resilient the students can be. I'm thinking about the services I'm providing, and honestly, it feels no different than most years. I'm helping some kids with loss, helping some kids with anger issues. It's just more about, you know, sanitizing everything before and after each kid comes in, which takes time. So as far as innovation, I think blocking out that time for the teachers and for me to push in if I need to has been really helpful.
Now for us, we have outpatient therapists. Some of those services, not all, but some continued throughout the shutdown that started in March. So they continued from March until May. We also have, now that we are back full time, we continue with those outpatient therapists. And we also have a school-based program, and that school-based program is actually doubling in size because of the need that we've had for some of our students. We also have a drop-in therapist. So if a kid, an issue, if they become anxious or overwhelmed or whatnot during the day, that they can go and access that person, in addition to the other counselor and myself here at the high school. So we really, our district has also gone out of their way to try and provide as much mental health opportunities for our kids as we can. It seems as if there's times that this area has been really hard hit with drug overdoses, parental deaths, etc. So the district really has made that commitment, just like Erica talked about, as providing mental health services for our students as needed. So very impressed with what we've been able to do. Also, while we were shut down, all of the counselors in our district got together and developed social media pages where we could reach more parents and students, whether it's Instagram or on Facebook, so that we could get information out to them throughout the pandemic, throughout the shutdown. And we've continued a little bit since we've been back to school as well. So.
Yeah, and talking to the students, Leah, it sounds like your TikTok is lit. Allie, help me understand some of the outreach support that you've been providing to help engage students and staff with social emotional wellness.
Yeah, so a recent example for me is I have a rural committee that I have formed in Southwestern PA and Northern West Virginia. And throughout the pandemic, we had a full meeting about a month ago at this point. And really, it was just a time for us to check in and for me to check in with them about how are you doing, what's going on in your school or your organization, like what are some issues, what are some really great assets and things that are happening where you are. And my position is unique in that I do not work with kids directly in my role with Remake Learning. But just talking with them and just seeing where they are in their own social emotional health, because their health is important as well. And just talking with them, and a big theme actually when speaking with the Rural Committee specifically was social emotional learning. How do we provide social emotional learning techniques, and how do we integrate it into our curriculum virtually when our students are at home and there's really no separation between home life or living status? So that was a really big theme that we had touched on. Now, prior to the pandemic, we did have a very large social emotional learning convening in the city of Pittsburgh. So that included not just rural members of Remake Learning, but folks across the network. So I know that we are leaning towards having another social emotional learning meetup is what we call it. So a convening of folks that want to join and talk about social emotional learning in the time of COVID-19. And also just the really great intermediate units surrounding Pittsburgh, especially I want to do a shout out to Intermediate Unit 1 in Greene, Washington, and Fayette counties. Yeah, I see. They do tremendous work, and all the IUs do, but IU 1 specifically, since COVID hit, they had, this great resource of this is where we can talk about mental health. This is where we're going to focus on social emotional learning. And everything they've been doing in that regard has been really fantastic. And the ways just the IUs in general have pulled together to come and talk about social emotional learning and how do we go about this now in a almost, if not completely, virtual time.
Just to pivot off of that, your intermediate units can be great resources when it comes to school climate coordinators, equity, bullying prevention. There's great outreach that can be done when it comes to training and technical assistance and additional resources just by reaching out to your local IU. So yeah, shout out to that. Now, I hear some things again when it comes to the engagement with the committee and the work that they do. I think, Lee, you were talking as far as hard-hit areas. I think one of the questions I'm really kind of wondering if we can revisit again is just on top of that, just the family support and the family and community engagement. Like, as much as we have been able to, I hear say, maintain a sense of normalcy within the walls of our schools, our students are still going home at this point to a lot of different circumstances. Talk to me about what you've been noticing, what you've been observing, and some of the work that you've been doing, if you could, please. Erica, can you lead?
Sure. One thing I noticed this year more than any is that we had a lot of move outs of my school and district and a lot of move ins. So it makes me wonder kind of what those situations were. And I try to gauge that when I would give new student tours or be contacting with those families, not trying to be nosy, but in a way that's, again, kind of gauging the home life. And I also do, with my kindergarteners, I do like a 5-minute kindergarten interview with every single one of them. And so there's questions in there like, who do you live with? What's your favorite food? Like, what do you do for fun? What does your family do together? And so like, those are things that, again, just give me a litmus test of how they are. And, I have to say, at least in my area, and I don't know if this is unique, people are really holding it together. As far as I know, and we're fortunate to have social workers in our district, and we do have mental health counselors, like Lee said. So I think because my district was so supportive of mental health and those services that support those families before the pandemic, it made this manageable. Now, talking to colleagues from districts that are even right next to mine, I know it's a struggle. You know, I'm part of our Northeast local council organization, and I feel like those that are back hybrid are kind of the worst off. I think that seems to be the most challenging when you're talking to those hybrid type schools, just because you only see them half the time. And, you know, you have kids that do work when they're there, and then the 3 days that they're not there, they're not doing any work. And so from what it sounds like, that's a very challenging situation.
Lee, Allie?
I'll just briefly, so for family support and engagement, seems as if obviously there have been an increased need for family supports as well as our student supports. One thing that I've noticed, obviously, because I'm kind of run it, we have a care closet where we have students that can get personal care items, as well as some clothing items as well. And we're still in the beginning stages of getting it up and running, but definitely the need has increased since the pandemic shutdown. And I would probably relate that to financial difficulties at home for some families have obviously increased. So that was one thing that I noticed, that our need grew over this time, so.
Yeah. I know that really when it comes to economic loss, when it comes to loss of jobs, it has been sweeping, and I think in really unpredictable ways. Allie, as far as just other family engagement strategies and other supports or community engagement strategies, what are some things that you've been hearing or noticing?
Well, for me, what I've been noticing, and this kind of piggybacks off of what's already been said, but I have noticed a greater dialogue and focus on food security and being able to feed children that are no longer able to be in the school building or even that after school building. So there are quite a few organizations that Remake Learning is partnered with that do, you know, after school food pickups in their schools. So many schools doing their own drive-through pickups for food. You know, and that's not a long-term change, but it's still addressing what's happening now. So yeah, food security, and just how are teachers and educators and organization leads able to connect with parents and families? And I think that's been kind of a sore spot in different ways. So how can we check in with families and caregivers about how their children are doing? How can we continuously have a dialogue with them so their child is having all their needs met? Where does it cross the line in terms of how each child is being met for us, educators and organization leads? So that's been kind of a theme I've noticed. It's also a conversation that I'm very passionate about, especially involving food security.
Yeah, I know that I've been vocal of some of my concerns for the Federal Department of Education and Agriculture, but shout out for free lunch until June 30. I walk into the lunchroom, I'll be like, I bought everyone lunch today and you're welcome. You know, I think, Allie, you touched on a really important part too, which I think we need to really highlight. One of my big concerns is not the students that I'm seeing, it's the students that I'm not seeing, and those, what we understand through public health data to be growing concerns as far as students and families when it comes to food security, access, and mental health, but they frankly drifted off of our radar because they aren't actually in school, aren't logging in, and aren't tuning in. When it comes to whether it be some of those formal or informal data sets, what have you been doing to understand the narrative of your schools, I think is one question.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question one more time for me?
I think, like, what is the data? What are the indicators to identify the most need populations?
Well, I know that, me see here. I know that at least on Remake Learning's part, we don't do any sort of that data collection in terms of need, but I know that IUs have been very invested in learning about which school districts in particular may be in the most need, and then gathering data from there based on their connections with their school districts. But in terms of Remake Learning and what I do and what we do as a collective, we haven't taken in any data about those sorts of things as of now.
Lee, Erica, as highly trained school counselors, what are some of the data pieces you're looking at right now?
So I think for us, attendance is the biggest one, which has always been one of the biggest ones. And, you know, although we have students that are virtual, we still count them logging in as attendance. And so if that's one of the benefits of having students live stream into the school, in addition to kind of having that structure, like I have eyes on students that are home, you know, and I can kind of like see, engage and look, you know, are they involved? Are they completing the tasks? But in addition to that, students that don't log in at all are marked absent. And so just like any other live student, if they were out 2 days, if they didn't log in for 2 days, now we're getting phone calls home, whether it's for myself or the nurse, you know, there's like a whole team of us that would then call and check those families. And I think that's another one of the benefits of being rural is that we like know our students and we know our families. So we know if this one didn't log in for a day or two, maybe we don't have to worry, but if this one didn't log in for 2 days, like, you know, they don't answer the phone, say we're gonna be knocking on the door. So that's our biggest indicator as far as like, you know, are they on track? What's their well-being? And do they need our help with something?
And did I hear that right in the green room before this, Erica, you've gotten a reputation as far as Walker, Texas Ranger of Northeast PA?
Not sure what you mean by that, but sure.
Lee, just help me understand some of the things that you're doing as far as data pieces.
Similar as for me as with Erica's, the only data point that I really have is attendance as well. Now, I don't personally see the attendance of our virtual students because it's we have different folks that are kind of taking the lead on our virtual academy. But I'm sure if there was an issue that they would pass that information along and then we would have to look at how to address it. So attendance is our big one. And we have, that seems to be the issue that comes up more and more from teachers back to me is that I have kids that haven't been here in 10 days. And I've tried to call, I've tried to email. They're not logging on to Google Classroom as they're instructed to. If they do have to go home, if there's a health concern and they have to be quarantined or whatnot. So, but if those kids aren't checking in, and although we're trying and they're not here, attendance is becoming a bigger and bigger issue for some of our kids. So at this point, Steve, that's the only data point that I can really think of that I have access to in my district or at my school, rather.
Yeah, and currently in our current practice, we're taking attendance by day and by period to see if we're noticing any trends when it comes to student level of engagement. I see a question right now. When you're checking in as attendance, do you have a minimum time requirement online? And for our viewers right now and for anyone who's on with us, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. I'm also reading the chat right now, so I can do both, but if you keep in the Q&A, I actually have a low attention span. But attendance, do you have a minimum time requirement?
So for our students that are streaming in, I mean, they're there throughout the day. We have like an 8 to 3 day. They're expected to be logging in that whole time. You know, they get their lunch break, they log off for recess, you know, because obviously they're not going to participate in that, but everything else, they're right there with us. And I'm not sure if, Teresa, if you mean like by days. And so I would say to that, our online kids have the same criteria, so to speak, as our live kiddos. So again, like if they're not there for 2 days, just like a live student, we would call, or, you know, 2 or 3 days. If they're not logging in, you know, they're going to get attendance letters. They're going to get, so just like we would a live student, and we made that very clear from the beginning, because we didn't want families thinking that our online version looked anything like it did back in the spring, where we couldn't require work, and it was more You know, it wasn't really new material. It was more like a review of things already learned. And so I think a lot of our families, after kind of trying the online, actually ended up changing their mind and sending their children live. So like if anything, we're getting more and more kids live as the weeks go on. You know, and part of that is because we have only had one positive test in our school so far. So we're fortunate in that way. But yeah, so to answer your question, we just hold them to the same standards as our live students.
Yeah. We have both a synchronous and asynchronous school virtually, and our virtual students, we ask them to be engaged until they're dismissed. And then for asynchronous students, we do have time measurements for approximations for assignment completion, and that's built across a calendar. And that's the way that we measure attendance and engagement. We also have a question here from Frank right now. Frank is asking, would there be a benefit if a school counselor was at a pod site working in a collaborative effort with families and the homeschool counselor? Does anyone feel, I'm not quite sure the full depth of that question, but does anyone want to jump on that real quick? And Frank, if you want to clarify in the chat, you're welcome to. Just as we're waiting and pivoting off of that, we understand moving into the stay-at-home closures, like stay-at-home orders, like there's a lot of value in evidence-based practice when it comes to the community school models, using our schools as hubs for things like access to not just behavioral health, but physical health care as well. And those could be resources. I think, and I touch upon it in the upcoming Pennsylvania School Counselor newsletter, that this might be a model that we should be revisiting in Pennsylvania at the very least. But are there any other thoughts as far as schools being hubs or pod sites?
Do you mean as far as like community type resources?
Yeah, I would say maybe. I think at least in what I'm seeing in Frank's question, there was a question as far as building opportunities for collaboration with both families and the homeschool counselor. So let's pivot out of that for a second. I really want to drill down the time that we have remaining to make sure that we're addressing some of the fundamental needs. Just framing it out real quick. Allie, I know that you had taken a chance to create a snapshot for us. Milo, if you want to put it up for us to talk about some of the one-page resources that we could help to access to support students in schools. Can we highlight some of those pieces right now?
Sure. Are you referring to the one pager or just the information that I've kind of collected?
I'll take all the above, but yes, absolutely the one pager.
Sure. Yeah, so we could go ahead and start with that one pager. Thank you. Okay. So this is just kind of a breakdown of what Remake Learning is and what Remake Learning in rural communities is. So you can see in the first block, kind of the Remake Learning Network mission statement. So the Remake Learning Network ignites engaging, relevant, and equitable learning practices in support of young people navigating rapid social and technological change. And to help create more equitable learning opportunities for students across our region, the network supports learners in rural communities through outreach to and inclusion of rural-based educators, schools, and organizations. So this one pager in particular, just a breakdown of what's been happening over the past 2 years. So my role as rural outreach coordinator was newly incepted about 2.5 years ago. And I'm the first person in that role, which is really nice and exciting. So these are just a few key takeaways from during that time. And I know they're not particularly equity focused, they're more just the numbers, but we've had over 100 rural stakeholders join the network since 2018, which was a great just addition to our network. So we're not just Pittsburgh anymore. We have a lot more rural folks involved. Over 350 rural-based school districts, out of school time organizations, art spaces, community organizations, museums, and libraries were reached out to. So a big component of my job is to do outreach to those folks across the region. And when I say region, I mean a 6-county radius surrounding Allegheny County, which is where Pittsburgh is. So all those counties and also the northern counties of West Virginia. So it's quite a large area. So it's been ongoing work. There's always new people to reach out to, which is great. 21, now close to 22 rural meetups and lunch and learns across Southwestern PA and West Virginia. So that being in person and virtual. So meetups and lunch and learns are kind of, a meetup is usually more of a get together, used to be in person, where you can meet up with other folks in the region and talk about best practices, what's going on where they are, and learn new things. Lunch and learns tend to be more of a presentation and conversation of sorts. So we've had ones like, I'm doing a series now called Race in Rural Spaces, and we are talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, whiteness, privilege, and anti-racist teaching. So that's been a very exciting ongoing project as part of the rural communities outreach. And there are other events as well, including computer science and maker learning and the arts, and just resources that are out there either regionally, locally, nationally, or internationally to share out with rural community members. So 330 rural stakeholders were connected through those events, which was really exciting. And it just keeps growing as we keep having them. And then some of you may know if you're around the region, but yesterday we had our Remake Learning Days Across America launch. So that is an event that happens each year. This year it was 16 regions across the United States that partake in Remake Learning Days. And that includes events across maker, arts, science, technology, outdoor learning, and more. It's a very exciting time, even though we're now virtual for the year. So that will be happening, a set of virtual events will be happening later on in 2021. So with that, we've had 73 Remake Learning Days events happen across Southwestern PA and West Virginia in 2019, which was very exciting. So with that, I know that was a lot of talking. My brain kind of went a different direction for a moment there. But I was doing some research, and something that really interests me is if you just do a quick Google search or you're just looking through the internet, there really isn't that much to see in terms of rural equity research. And that includes race, ethnicity, health. I think the one I've seen the most has actually been health, but there's not a lot to be found. Now, that's just me doing a search. If there is, please tell me. I would love to know that there is.
In the chat or comment.
Yeah, in the chat, let me know, please. So, and I've also been doing a lot of research on connectivity and how that looks in rural spaces. Now, this is more in broader terms. It's not just Southwestern PA focused. Again, as I said, there isn't that much research that I'm finding. But broadly, I'm seeing statistics which are interesting, sometimes a little bit alarming, but it is, it's the state of where we are right now. So 43% of rural districts provided to devices across the US, but only 28% provided a hotspot for their students to utilize. So they're giving them Chromebooks and computers and tablets and whatever great resources, materials they need to complete their work, but they're not giving them the actual, well, not structure, but they're not giving them something to actually help them do it.
Just to communicate to our elementary school people, that means they've given them the cups, but not the string in between. But continue, Allie.
Yes. Which I found that very interesting. Now, I think a lot of us know that structure in terms of internet access in rural communities especially is not very good in many places. So in, this excitement about hotspots, it's so wonderful, but how can we continue to have these hotspots when there's not really a structure? So I also learned that fewer rural districts expected to provide instruction and at the same time monitor student progress. So, taking on these dual roles of, and it's already been spoken about, right? So we're having teachers and educators. They are doing the teachings online or hybrid or fully in person, but speaking specifically online during COVID-19, they are teaching and, they're laying out the day and they have all their students, but also keeping in mind what students weren't here, what students were here. How are they differing in engagement? Am I meeting them where they're at? And being able to monitor each student's progress has become harder. So that was believe I have, it's 27% and 43% respectively. Couldn't actually tell you what I meant by that aside, but I will also include that link and that resource for folks to look at too.
Great. So I hear a different part as far as monitoring progress. What are some of the things that for Lee, Erica, have you done to address concerns as far as learning loss for your students?
Like, I can't take too much credit for what the school is doing, but you know, because we have them in person, we had the luxury of doing our like Ames Web, Dibbles, whatever you use in your district to kind of see where they're at. And interestingly, we found that, you know, our 4th and 5th graders who were savvy enough to log online, and I think the curriculum they're using is more online friendly, fared well, whereas our 1st grade class, who missed a third of their kindergarten experience, look like kindergarteners in that they're non-readers, they, you know, might not even know their letter sounds. And so the special education team is working with our 1st grade teachers. And so it's just really become kind of like a specialized, localized thing in terms of kind of trying to boost those back up. I think the younger the students are, the worse they fared with those gaps.
I know that I have regressed to emotionally functioning like a kindergartner. Lee, how about in your school?
I think it's a little different at the high school level, only because where Eric or anyone else at the elementary level, you see those kids, but with the high school, you're changing complete subjects for some of them. Personally, I can't speak that just how much learning loss I've seen with kids, but I'm sure as time progresses, the more that we're in school, that there's definitely going to be those kiddos who are struggling. We have had some discussions on some of them, especially those ones that pretty much dropped off during that 4th marking period last year, where they didn't log in. They weren't able to connect with us. You know, we went and did home visits. Nobody answered the door. So we do have some of those kids that are going to have a learning gap. And how does that fit into some of their classes? Because, you know, we're going from algebra B maybe to geometry, or a general science into a bio with lab. And if I'm missing some of those key pieces, those learning pieces, that's definitely going to be a challenge at times for them. So we've had some kids that were definitely discussing that there is a loss because they didn't connect with us. They didn't log in. So I would think as the school year goes on and expectations continue for some of those classes, some of those harder classes especially, we might see some of those learning losses become more evident.
I saw Allie dropped in the chat Brookings Institute resource. I just want to take a few minutes left, just with our last few minutes. Allie, you'd already talked about race in rural communities, I believe was one of your lunch and learns, and it sounds really great. And just that what we know from the American School Counselors Association is they have renewed their call to have conversations as far as anti-oppression work, diversity, equity, and inclusion. What are some of those conversations looking like at your schools right now, I think, or what are some of the resources that would be available for school counselors trying to engage in those conversations? Those would be the questions I would have for you right now.
So I always turn to ASCA. I know the position statements that they have, the resources they've had. In fact, when we were in, you know, full remote learning back in the spring, I, you know, utilized so much of the ASCA trainings and how great they were at immediately putting out some resources for us. So as a rule of thumb, a lot of times that's where I go, but I have to say I'm very sad that in my district we have very little diversity. We have 98% Caucasian population. And so although I teach lessons and, you know, we have group discussions and class meetings about it, I think it's more of, you know, a superficial learning to them because they don't have an opportunity to experience kind of the different rich cultures that, you know, they would benefit from. So unfortunately, you know, that's kind of like where my gap is, so to speak. It's not that we have a problem with inequality. It's you know, the population that I live in, it doesn't lend itself to a lot of learning from different walks of life and cultures.
I think in my area, we're very similar. There isn't a lot of diversity in the area that I'm from, so I'm kind of at a loss for that. Again, ASCA does have some good resources, but it's kind of hard when you don't have a diverse area to really get into some of those issues. So I don't have much else to offer on that, Steve.
That's okay. And Allie, I see you dropped in some resources right now. Can you talk about some of the other resources you provide through your Lunch and Learns?
Yeah, so just speaking based off of the Race and Rural Spaces events. So we're about to have our second one. I'm actually going to drop that in the chat. Even though, you know, it's more focused on Southwestern PA, it's not, you know, the content itself is applicable to everyone that's either in a rural community or not. So I will drop it in there in case you're interested. That conversation will reflect upon questions, conversations, and equity. So it will have a part that revisits what our first event was. So as part of Remake Learning has been doing a lot of sharing out and disseminating of resources that involve racial equity and justice. So I will actually just include here, let me see, aside from just that event, I can share with you all kind of our general calendar right now that showcases some of the work that we are doing involved. Yes, in the chat. And it's a mixture of things too. It's not just that. But this conversation this ongoing conversation has been really important to me, as though I'm not an educator, as someone that works with educators and organization leads to have. And I would be remiss if I didn't have it with them, you know, owning, you know, my identities and my privilege and how I'm a part of an oppressive system, and how to make it clear that even though you may be and this isn't calling anyone out, I was the same way when I was in school. You know, when you're in a very white dominant space or school community or organization community, there's sort of this mindset that it doesn't relate. Why do I need to learn about this when my school is mostly white kids? So it's been a really exciting time and really exciting conversations, and everyone's been really excited just to learn what to do next and how they can put their best foot forward in having conversations with their students about race and justice and equity.
I know we were part of the team to announce the rollout of the Ed Equity Hub for the Pennsylvania Department of Education, which will also be featured, I believe, for a coming conference. Make sure you sign up. But in addition to that, I believe we continue to offer our resources to help to guide conversations, support school counselors in our ongoing work. With the time that we have left right now, any closing thoughts or well wishes or words of advice for school counselors in the grind supporting their students in rural communities? Erica, you let us off. Why don't we whip it around one more time?
Okay, you know, I would say, being a counselor that works in a building by myself, the most important resource for me is to talk to other counselors, and even other counselors that are in your district, because as much as we are all trying to support and take care of all of our students and all of our staff, and like being a shoulder to cry on for admin, we have to take care of ourselves, and who better to do that than, you know, reaching out to our fellow school counselors. So if you're not part of a local organization, you don't have one, you know, find some colleagues in your area, attend events, host events, just to try to get in touch, because more than ever, we need those connections.
Lee?
Yeah, I agree. When I was elementary, I was by myself in the building also, Erica. At the high school level, I am fortunate to have another counselor in the building with me. But I think you're 100% right. We really do have to lean on each other in order to help each other through this, because a lot of stuff does come our way. And if you're not well, if your cup is empty, it's really hard to help other people out. So find those ways for self-care, which is extremely important. And part of that is connect with other counselors. They're a great resource.
Okay. And Allie, you've been a wealth of resources, and again, thank you for being so generous with your time. Any other suggestion or resources for school counselors out there?
I would say, just to echo our other folks here, just to, utilize your local network. So I mean, I know for many people that are attending right now, it may not be Remake Learning, but utilize any local education network hubs that you have. Utilize your community resources in the ways that you are able, and utilize your intermediate unit. Utilize anything that's been helpful to you in the past, or things that, just something creative, something you haven't thought about before in the future of assisting your students during COVID and beyond, whatever happens after the pandemic is over.
Hear that word of advice, like for instance, your state school counselors association, be a great resource.
There you go.
There were a lot of great things being shared. Again, when we talk about some of the technical support, we heard over the past few weeks that Pennsylvania is investing $15 million through the governor's emergency funds, the GEARS fund, to help to further support the infrastructure and technology for our students. So there'll be more information rolling out. We're going to continue to provide you the most relevant professional development. I'm going to ask our executive director to jump on real quick as well as we start winding this down, to make sure that we continue to offer you all the best resources that are coming up. Amelia, what else are we offering right now?
Well, like I said in the beginning, we're offering for urban schools another webinar in 2 weeks that'll be similar to this, to talk about challenges that those schools are facing, as well as the resources that you can use to help through those challenges. In addition to that, as Steve mentioned earlier, we do have our annual conference, which will look different this year. It will be virtual, and it's going to be held the same days, December 3rd and 4th. Registration for that is open right now. We do plan to roll out the new Equity Hub that is being provided by PDE. And I'm trying to think what else. There's going to be some other fun things coming up. So I really do encourage you guys to just keep checking out our website, paschoolcounselor.org. If you are not a member of PSCA, I urge you to join. We have a lot of fun, relevant, and really good quality professional development coming up for you. And we're here for you if you need any help. As all the panelists said, you got to lean on each other. So that's what we're here for. So again, I want to thank everyone, all of our panelists, for joining us today. Allie, thank you so much for all of your resources. We will be sharing those when we post the recording of this webinar. So any of you can come back and check those out at a later date. Lee, Erica, thank you for speaking from your experiences. And Steve, I'm excited that you were here to facilitate for us today. Is there anything that I'm missing, Steve, that you feel?
Most importantly, to you, the school counselors who are watching this right now, thank you for the work that you're continuing to do for your students. We understand what you're working with right now, and we're here for you. So, yeah.
Yep. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you again soon. Take care, everyone. Have a good afternoon.